Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Today's chat is about pots, mounts, media, that sort of thing. This is not as simple a subject as it might initially sound, but first of all, let's have a go at pots, sorts of. You've got your black plastic pots, probably the cheapest you can get, and they're perfectly adequate. You can get clear pots or semi-clear pots, plastic again, not quite so cheap, sometimes not so easy to get hold of, but perfectly adequate. And then you move on to clay pots, with or without holes, again, perfectly adequate. So that's what pots there are. There's also baskets, that's halfway between a pot, bare rooted and a mount, I suppose, somewhere in the middle there. Something to put a plant in that you may or may not add some sort of media in there, that sort of thing. And then obviously there's mounts. Different types of wood and bark can be used. Some are more suitable than others. The cork bark has the added bonus of taking an absolute age to even think about starting to rot, and doesn't hold water as such, therefore is far less likely to rot for obvious reasons. Other types of bark will hold water to an extent, and by holding water, remember that bark is dead, yeah, it's going to rot relatively quickly compared with cork bark. And then there's pieces of wood. This is not bark, this is actual bits of wood. Some wood is not suitable, and I don't know why. I don't use any, so I can't really discuss that topic of what woods are good and what woods aren't, because I don't use any. I'm not venturing into something that I don't sort of do myself as such. Right, then we've got media. Two distinct things. You've either got organic media or inorganic media. In amongst the inorganic media, you've got the river rock pebblesy type thing that hold no water. Then you've got things like lava rock, which does hold some water, and various other things. There's things like rock wool, which is inorganic, which is like a, well, something I don't go near because I have a skin reaction to that stuff, so I wouldn't use that on those grounds. Not that it isn't any good, I just can't get near the stuff without itching. So the inorganic stuff. Then the organic media, you're really looking at bark, sphagnum moss, I suppose charcoal. Maybe that's somewhere between the two, but charcoal can be mixed in. In the inorganic side, stroke organic side, because it's inorganic but used in organic media, are things like perlite or sponge rock, that sort of thing, as an additive, helps with drainage, etc. Keeps a bit of air around the media. So that's the sort of things that are available. Now you've got to look at the direct question I was asked, is what is most suitable for what sorts of orchids? There is no answer. There's no straight answer, because different pots and different medias are going to work totally differently in different environments. Now, I don't grow outside, but the first thing to say is that if you're growing outside without some sort of permanent roof cover, and your plants are exposed to the weather as such, not on about sun, I'm on about weather like rain, then your plants will get rained on. If they get rained on, they get washed clean, and your pot is going to get very wet. So you should be able to answer your own question here. What would be the best media to have in that environment? The answer's inorganic, isn't it? Just think it through. If you had bark and moss in an environment like that, how wet do you think it's going to get when it rains? Especially if it rains frequently, it's going to be soaking soggy wet all the time, and it will break down incredibly fast. So not ideal. But things like river rock, you can rain on that as much as you like, and it will go through, wash your pot clean, no build up of salts, magic. I can't grow outside, so I'm limited to inside. And trying to get that volume of water through a pot is not on for me. So I need something that retains more moisture. So I've gone for organic. Combinations of, starting with the thick chunky bark with nothing added, right down to the small grade bark mixed with sphagnum moss. That's my most dense media, yeah, as opposed to my most open media, which is the large bark, yeah. But you can combine that with different pots to get different results. In my holy clay pots, I could use small bark and moss, yeah, and the holy clay pot would help it dry a lot faster. But I'd have to ask myself, why am I using the smaller bark and moss in the first place? And the answer is because it's for an orchid that likes to stay moist and not totally dry out, unless for like shorter periods when it's cold in the winter sort of thing. We won't do seasons, be here all day, yeah. So the reason for using the clay pot is that I want what's in it to dry fast. So holy clay pots, fastest drying, most air around the roots, have mainly got Cattleya types in them with large bark on its own. That's my fast wet dry cycle. Suitable for Cattleya types. Brilliant. Perhaps not suitable for a Masdevallia. Yeah? What's the point of having something that dries off really quickly when you're supposed to be keeping it moist all the time? So you've not only got about to think of what the sort of pot you're going to use and what the pot's made of and what media you're going to use inside it, but what ends up in it? What sort of orchid are you planning this for? And therein lies the word, really, planning. So if somebody walked up now and gave me a nice shiny Dracula that I'd never seen before, I would immediately think open basket. No choice. Why no choice for that one? Because it pushes its spikes out the bottom of the flipping plant. They've got to have somewhere to escape. So what that gets potted in, the choice is gone, really. Yeah? It's going to have to be an open basket. And they should not dry out. So it's going to be either all moss or moss with a centre area of perhaps some small bark with some moss, but not necessarily. It could just be pure moss. Now if somebody walked up with a Masdevallia, I'd have a similar idea in my head. It could go in the open basket, but it would also be quite happy in a normal pot, possibly even in a clay pot. But if it went in a clay pot, the clay would take some moisture out of the media and help with the evaporation on a plant that's not supposed to dry out. You see where I'm going? Therefore the plastic pot would be more suitable, yeah, to hold the moisture in, because I don't want the plant to keep drying out. I've got enough work on my hands without adding to it unnecessarily. So right, back to the pots. The black pots are fine if you trust yourself to know when to water without being able to see your media, and confident enough to know that inside that black pot that you can't see into, your roots are okay. If you don't trust yourself on those factors, then you should be aiming down the clear pot line. Now I've stood my clear pots inside black pots, so I've got the luxury of both worlds. The black pot stops the algae forming around the outside of the pot, yeah, so keeps the pot dark, but doesn't restrict my access to viewing what's going on in the pot. Now that's my current setup. That's new for this year. I've had to put up with the algae in the past because I haven't got the confidence to know exactly what's going on in a black pot. I'd have to keep lifting it out to have a look, because I'd be curious if nothing else. That's the polite version. I'm more likely to be worried, not knowing what's going on. So yeah, pot size. This doesn't apply to everybody, and I'm now indoor growing. I've left the outside because I can't do it. Yeah, so we're back inside. So this is home growing, greenhouse, grow room type stuff. Yeah, interior sort of environment, not exposed to the elements. So I've noticed that with Oncidium types, they produce a better root system faster the tighter they are in their pot. That doesn't mean to say they wouldn't have produced an equally good root system in a larger pot, but I seem to have found due to experimentation and length of time trying these things, that they grow a better root system much faster if they're crammed in the pot and squashed in. You can always move them up to a bigger one later. So if you're starting off with a root system that's not too good, putting it in a giant pot isn't going to help, because that pot won't dry out, because the roots aren't there to use up the moisture, so you end up with the plant staying wetter than perhaps it would like to be. Yeah? Now we've still got these pots that shouldn't dry out in there somewhere, but even on a plant that shouldn't dry out, I let them get quite drier than when I first watered them. That I don't let them totally dry, but my Masdevallias are bordering on that point, to the point where I look at them and I think, you need some water. Just by looking at the pot, looking at the media through the clear pot, I can tell straight away you need some water. Or I can pick up that said pot and said, well, you don't need any, you're still wet from last time. So just because it says on my calendar or diary water plants today, they don't necessarily get water. And yes, I am joking, I haven't got a calendar and a diary. My plants get water when I think they need it, not because of the day of the week. But I'm lucky I can work like that. So different plants suit different pots and definitely suit different medias. Yeah. I've had plants that I've planted in medium bark because their root systems seem to suit that, in a reasonable sized pot for a plant that's going to get quite big, and it hasn't. It's stalled or it's slowed up. You take that out and put it in a much smaller pot with, say, medium and small bark mixed with some moss added, and it takes off like a rocket. But I have to say I've also had ones that look like they'd be suitable for small bark and moss mixed up, and they don't grow as well as perhaps they ought to be, and by putting them in a more open mix they seem to go a bit better. But a lot of this is trial and error. You know, this is experimentation and drawing on plants of a similar type and what's happened to those in the past. So that's the so-called experience bit that doesn't happen overnight, obviously. I will put one bit of seasonal thing in, and it's mainly because of my Latorias that I got wrong, and as a consequence they've suffered badly. Latorias come from an environment where they would be drier in winter, but they wouldn't get cold, so it wouldn't matter so much if they were putting some new growths up during that time. They'd still be okay. So in my head I thought, right, we've got continuous growers here. Yeah, well, what I forgot about is that only happens when it's warm, and in the winter in here it's not warm. It's down to 12 degrees C, and where Latoria types come from, they would probably never see a temperature that low, let alone for several months, with short days, lower light levels, knock-on effect. Yeah, so I got them wrong, and as a consequence a lot of their roots failed during the winter because they weren't growing at all and they couldn't use up the moisture in the pot, so they stayed wet too long. Yeah, so lesson learnt. You know, they're now in a media catering for their winter quarters, not their growing season. In the growing seasons, I've now got to water them more often because they're in a more open mix that's going to dry quickly in the winter and not keep their roots soggy. It means I've got to water them more often in their growing season. Otherwise they'll get dry and stop growing that way. You know, so it's a happy balance. I often get asked, can I mount this particular orchid? Right. I would probably heavily advise against trying to mount any sort of terrestrial orchid. That leaves the lithophytes and the epiphytes. And I don't care what the orchid's called, it'll go on a mount. Ask Insa. If it moves, you bounce it. And they work. Yeah? What you do get if you do that, though, and head down that road, is workload, because they're going to dry fast. Certainly the last week, daily. I've been out here with the sprayer in that heat this week because I can't be asked to can't be bothered to take all these mounts down and water them properly. But they got sprayed twice a day during all this heat, and Hurricane Hector has really come into his own this week because Obviously, with the heat building up in here, the extractor and the inlet fan fire up to change the air. But unfortunately, the air being drawn in from outside isn't that cool. So they were refreshing the air, but they were taking the humidity out at the same time. And Hurricane Hector's been firing up, rather than on and off, virtually permanently from about 11, 12 o'clock right through till sort of half 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. Hurricane Hector's been chucking that moisture out at the rate of 10 to 12 litres a day. Now 10 to 12 litres in an area this size you wouldn't see across the room, but when the air's getting changed it's necessary, yeah, to help keep that humidity up. Now at the moment the sun's just come out, my temperature's just shooting up, and as a consequence my humidity reading's starting to drop. Because I've switched all the kit off because the sun wasn't out just now and now it is. So I need to get Hurricane Hector back on and get the circulating fans back on, which makes noise. So I hope that's helped with the pots, but think of your orchid type. You know, I'll just say like a Oncidium type, yeah? When they are growing, they're drinkers. So having them in a wholly clay pot with large bark would not be the best of ideas because they're going to dry, and they shouldn't do, yeah? So they need to go in a media suited to their growing season that can also cater for periods of inactivity. Notice I don't use the word dormancy, that's a whole different ball game. But there will come times on your Oncidium type when it's not growing. Might have just finished blooming, yeah? And you're waiting for the next set of new growths. But in the meantime, nothing's happening. No spikes, no new roots, no new growths. It's doing nothing. And that's the time when it might actually pay to dry it out in between watering. Because what's it going to do with that water? And more importantly, what's it going to do with the water and the feed you keep chucking in the pot? You see what I mean? You have to sort of think about what your plant's doing. Now you get a stonker like this that's chucking new growths out all over the place, left, right and centre. I've got a job to get too much water in there. Chances are I could stand that in water at this point in its growth cycle and it wouldn't do it any harm, yeah? But there'll come a time later in the year, all those new growths have matured, it's doing its spikes, which it's actually doing now, but I'm not going to get it down and mess about, and the blooms are finished and it's waiting for a while before the new growths come up. At that point it'll need to dry, or be virtually dry. You choose. I mean, I actually go for the time of year my Oncidiums are most likely to be doing next to nothing, if anything at all, is in the winter, yeah, when it's cold in here. So I've got to go careful. If I start chucking the amount of water on I did in the summer, it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks to dry off because it's not going to use it, which could lead to some root rot, yeah. So anyway, that's a chat about pot size, pot selection, pot type, and the media you're going to put in it. There is no one rule, no one answer. It varies from plant to plant. It varies from orchid type to orchid type. And it varies dramatically geared up to your environment, yeah? Not everybody else's, because yours could be quite unique, yeah? So you got to think these things through and try and get into a habit of doing that at the point before you buy the plant. Not necessarily go, pretty blooms, get it home and think, that's a really cool grower that likes really high humidity. Where am I going to put that in my house? Try and do it the other way round and think about what you've got and where you can grow your orchids and what those environments are like, because you'll have more than one. I've even got multiple environments here. I've got high up environments where it's quite a lot warmer and brighter, and cooler, shadier bits under constant flow of little computer fans, yeah? So even in a single environment like this, there's still variables, but in a house there's a lot more variables. North facing window, south facing window, east, west, a bit back from the window, yeah? So, you know, but the one thing about house growing environments, they're usually lacking in humidity and often airflow. So doing a bit of work along those lines will help your orchids grow better, yeah? Still warm, dry air is not that good for orchids. Then they're going to object eventually, even if they don't do it immediately. So long-term health is geared up to some good airflow, a humidity suitable for the orchids, yeah, and that might not be suitable for the humans. Therein lies a happy balance when you grow in the home. You know, I'd say a comfortable temperature, daytime temperature during the growing season is 24 to 26 degrees. If you've got cooler growers, less than that. All right, the fans have just kicked on, so that means the temperature's just reached the magic 28. So I need to get the kit back on now. But yeah, you know, sort of 24 to 26 degrees, but at those temperatures, ideally, you want 70-75% humidity for a lot of orchids. You try doing that in your house and it's not so easy, you know. So you have to compromise. And one of the compromises a lot of us have to do, one way or the other, is the choice of the orchids we're going to grow. Stick to the ones that do well, and you'll have a nice healthy orchid collection that keep you happy. Yeah? Venture off into obscure things that you haven't tried before, yes, by all means, but don't go mad and go and buy 20 of them. Go and buy 1 or 2 and see if they do okay, and if they do, perhaps get a few more. Don't go mad. Orchid growing is not about going mad, it's about a little bit now and again, if you see what I mean. I mean, my rate of orchid purchases supposedly was going to be 0 this year. Well, I didn't make it, did I? We did get some in, but not a lot. You know, I know some people who came home from Malvern with 10 new plants. You know, I came home with 1. And that was almost a reluctant purchase, because I didn't really want to come home with any, but I did see one I fancied. You know, that's the way it is nowadays. So yeah, choose your media, size, moisture retention and all that, geared up to the sort of orchid that's going to go in it. Don't go mad with pot size. It's all very well saying I've allowed for 3 years growth. Your media will have broken down long before then. Don't allow for donkey's years growth. Allow for 1 or 2 years growth and keep the plant cosy, and I think you'll find you'll have better root systems, simply because the volume of the media relative to the roots is nicely balanced. Big pots with poor root systems is not nicely balanced. Yeah? So, and if the plant grows such a good root system that it's trying to get out of the pot, then just gently lift it out of the pot, put it in a size bigger and drop some new media down the edge. That's virtually no root disturbance, and it will give the roots a bit of extra room. But if you give them the room early on in their life, I've found that they don't tend to do as well. Others may differ, I don't know. So a chat about pots. Mounts, as far as plants on mounts are concerned, you can go for the bare root. You can go for small amounts of moss. I would suggest that's suitable for the plants that need some sort of drying off for quite long periods in the winter. And then those that are going to grow fast, like Oncidium types, if you mount those, they're going to need a fair old bit of moss or they'll dry too quick. And you'll get a stop-start mechanism with their growth pattern. Yeah? Unless you want to start watering twice a day. Yeah? So you've got to think these things through. Is my plant a heavy drinker in its growing season? Yes, you can still mount it, but get a bit heavy on the moss, because you'll need to keep those roots moist constantly. It's going to be a drinker whether it's in a pot or a mount. It's the same plant, yeah, so you'd have to accommodate. Yeah. Anyway, that's the result of a combination of all sorts of questions over a period of time, and I hope there's some bits in there that have helped. But as I said, your media is geared up to what you want your plant to do through the seasons. Yeah, your pot size is geared up to, with me, the smallest pot I can get the thing in that at least allows it to breathe. Yeah, and your pot type is geared up to, do you want to see the roots firstly, and do you want that plant to dry quickly or not? If you want it to dry quickly, head down the clay route, or the clay with pots. They'll dry quick. Yeah, as I said, plants that are drinkers that need to stay moist all the time, don't match with the holy clay pots. They're better off in a solid pot, you know, where they can stay moist longer. And yeah, leave it at that for now. Oh, big thank yous for all your congratulations on my RHS award, most appreciated. And same for the people on the Facebook group. Yeah, lots of activity there around that subject, so thanks a lot for all that. It is appreciated, quite honestly. It was a bit special for me, so thanks a bunch for all the thanks. Good stuff. Probably never get another chance. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by. I've got to get this kit back on.